The first thing that hits you when you look at this week's situation is the sheer magnitude of this game against the Rams. It doesn't feel like a typical late-season matchup. It's way bigger than that. It's not just another game in the National 425 window. It's not just Fox Game of the Week. This is a real test. A test of toughness, of identity, of how much this team can endure when the pressure peaks and the injuries start stacking up at the absolute worst possible moment. And if you took a look at the Lions' latest injury report, you already know this isn't a week where anyone gets to breathe easy. But that's exactly where the story of this team becomes stronger. When no one thinks it's possible, when the weight gets heavier, when everything seems to be working against them, the Lions respond. They respond with grit, with intensity, with personality. They respond like a team that's building something real, game after game, season after season. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button. It helps the channel a ton. Let's roll. Taylor Decker missing practice again isn't just another line on an injury list. It's the type of update that makes every Lions fan stop for a second. This is a defense that can get after the quarterback in a hurry, and Jared Goff is walking into a stadium where the Rams' pass rush tends to wake up when the lights get brighter. Decker's dealing with that shoulder, and even though he's the kind of player who would tape his arm to his body if it meant he could be on the field, 2 straight missed practices tells you all you need to know. This is a real concern. And the problem goes even deeper, because Dan Skipper has already been relied upon as an extra blocking tight end thanks to how banged up that position has been. So if Decker can't go, you're not just replacing a tackle, you're shifting every piece that has been barely holding together in the first place. And then there's Kirby Joseph. Limited Wednesday, then no practice the next day. That knee has been bothering him all year, and the trend is pointing in the wrong direction. As much as fans want him on the field, nobody wants another Brian Branch type scenario, where an already hurt player pushes too far and suddenly the season becomes next year's problem. Branch's Achilles already took him out for the year and likely deep into next year. The Lions cannot afford another defensive back going down like that, especially not with the Rams receivers coming like a tidal wave. The secondary is already entering the game with enough on its plate, but losing Kirby would make that challenge even heavier. But in the middle of all the worrying, there are some genuinely important steps forward. Miles Frazier has stepped up, and the offensive line as a whole finally looks like it's trending in a healthier direction. Seeing Christian Mahogany logging 2 limited practices is a huge sign, even if he's not expected to suit up this week. Realistically, he may be back by the Steelers game, and almost certainly by the playoffs if Detroit punches its ticket. Getting both Mahogany and Frazier ready at the same time could be a turning point for this unit. Then there's Ko Owasika working his way back, another piece in a puzzle the Lions have been trying to solve for weeks. The shape of this offensive line is stabilizing at exactly the time you want that to happen. Thomas Harper practicing in limited fashion is another under-the-radar win. Concussions are unpredictable, but limited practice usually means the light at the end of the tunnel isn't far away. And then comes a name fans might overlook but absolutely shouldn't, Shane Zylstra. With Sam Laporta and Brock Wright already down, the tight end room has been as thin as it gets. Zylstra being limited 2 days in a row means there's a real chance he could suit up Sunday, and his ability as a pass catcher is something this offense desperately needs right now. Even if he's not a star, he fills a hole that has caused ripple effects across the entire offense. On top of that, Alex Anzalone is back in full after dealing with an illness, which puts at least one piece of the defense back where it belongs. As for the Rams, the Wednesday report tells us what we already expected. Some big names resting, some bumps and bruises, the usual late season grind. Nothing on their side suggests the Lions are going to catch a lucky break. Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, Byron Young, they're all likely to be there. And with the Rams passing attack running hot, Detroit's secondary is going to have to dig as deep as it has all season. This is exactly the type of matchup where a defensive coordinator like Kelvin Shepard can make a name for himself. If Detroit can just slow the Rams down, doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be pretty, just a few timely stops, that could swing the entire game. Because the Lions know what's coming. Sean McVay isn't hiding how badly he wants this one. He's acting like the pass needs correcting, like the fan reaction to Matthew Stafford is a score he wants to settle. Whether that storyline truly matters or not, what matters on the field is that the Rams are going to attack from the first snap and won't let up. That's why the Decker situation is so critical. That's why the tight end injuries matter. That's why every defensive back on the report changes the outlook of this matchup. The Rams can score in a heartbeat. The Lions have to match them, protect Goff, and steal just enough possessions to keep the game within their control. Now the question that's been buzzing everywhere lands right back here. With this injury report, the matchup, and everything on the line, what do you think this means for the Lions heading into Sunday? Picking up from that moment, Everything about this game feels like it's pushing the Lions into a crossroads where resilience matters more than comfort. And that's why the injury landscape shapes the entire tone of what Detroit must do in Los Angeles. When you're facing an offense as explosive as the Rams, you cannot walk into that building at 70% and expect the game to bend in your favor. You need every workable piece, every fringe contributor, every player who can give you even 2 meaningful snaps. And that's why the outlook on Shane Zylstra, Thomas Harper, K.O. Owasika, Christian Mahogany, and Miles Frazier matters far more than their individual names might suggest on paper. That tight end crisis has quietly been one of the most disruptive storylines of the past few weeks. With Sam Laporta already a foundational part of the offense and Brock Wright being such a steady piece in both the run and pass game, losing both of them didn't just weaken one position group. It stripped Ben Johnson of some of his most flexible personnel formations. Suddenly the offense that thrived on shifting, motioning, disguising, and creating mismatches was forced into more static formations, driving more pressure onto the offensive line at the same time Decker went down. So the possibility of Zylstra returning isn't about replacing talent with equal talent. It's about restoring balance, bringing back the threat of a real receiving tight end, and giving Jared Goff one more reliable outlet when the pocket collapses. And speaking of collapsing pockets, the Decker situation lingers over this game like a storm cloud. The Rams' defensive front thrives in front of their home crowd. Games in Los Angeles often turn into track meets, but they also turn into chaos for opposing quarterbacks who can't get set. That's where Jared Goff's calm nature becomes both a gift and a vulnerability. When he has protection, he can slice through any defense. When that protection breaks, everything becomes harder for this offense. Dan Skipper stepping in is fine as a temporary solution, but when he's already taking reps as an extra tight end, the structure of the offense becomes a puzzle with mismatched pieces. Defensively, the mission is simple but heavy. Survive the first punch, the second punch, and the counterpunch that usually follows. Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams on opposite sides create a constant strain on every covered shell. If Kirby Joseph cannot go, the Lions are forced into a rotation that must play disciplined, assignment-sound football while also handling one of the most creative offensive minds in the league. That's where Kelvin Shepherd's coaching impact becomes critical. He has to anticipate McVay's sequencing, the early scripted plays, the tempo changes, and the vertical shots. And even with all that preparation, Detroit's secondary must make 2 or 3 plays that change the math of the game. This is also a moment where the offense must be ready to stay aggressive. Dan Campbell has been measured lately, more selective with 4th downs, more situationally cautious. But that likely changes this weekend. Against an offense that can erase a deficit in 60 seconds, field goals aren't going to be enough. This is probably a game where Campbell leans into what has made him who he is, trusting his offense, trusting his players, and forcing the Rams to defend every inch of the field. Any hesitation, any conservative stretch, and the game risks tipping too far toward Los Angeles. And then there's the emotional undercurrent. Sean McVay talking about revenge, referencing how Lions fans reacted to the Stafford-Goff trade, gives this matchup an edge that goes beyond X's and O's. McVay knows how to motivate his team, and he's using history, pride, and storyline fuel to fire up his locker room. Meanwhile, Detroit walks into this matchup carrying its own narrative, one built on rebuilding, belief, and now survival. The Lions have fought too hard to let injuries become the ending to their season, and that's why this game feels like a statement opportunity. Win here, and you reinforce that this team can take a hit and keep moving. But circling back to the real heart of this situation, everything comes down to health. The players trending upward give Detroit hope. The players trending downward create anxiety. And the players right on the edge, questionable, limited, day-to-day, hold the keys to how competitive this game can truly be. With the playoff race tightening and only a handful of games left, the Lions cannot afford a step backward. So with everything laid out, the injuries, the matchups, the motivation, the stakes, tell me this. Do you believe the Lions can overcome all of this and make this a statement win on the road? Or are the injuries simply too much to overcome? When you look at how this matchup sets the stage for the final stretch of the season, it becomes clear that the Lions aren't just fighting the Rams on Sunday. They're fighting the clock, the injury report, and the thin margins that separate playoff teams from playoff hopefuls. With 3 games left, every possession matters, every snap matters, and every player who can push through for even a handful of reps becomes part of a much bigger story. And that's why the progress from guys like Miles Frazier and K.O. Owasika carries real weight. The offensive line is the heartbeat of this team, and over the past few weeks, that heartbeat has been unstable. Shuffle after shuffle, injuries stacking on top of injuries, and a run game that has had to adjust on the fly. Seeing this group inch closer to full health, especially with Christian Mahogany nearing his debut, creates a sense that Detroit is starting to regain its foundation. If you give Goff a stable front, if you give Ben Johnson back some of his flexibility, and if you can force the Rams to respect both the run and the pass, suddenly this game tilts from survival to opportunity. Defensively, though, the challenge ahead is as steep as anything Detroit has faced all season. The Rams are designed to stress communication and force defenders into uncomfortable decisions. And with the Lions potentially down players in the secondary, those decisions become even more pressure-packed. This is where leadership matters, where Alex Anzalone returning to full strength gives the defense stability, where the coaching staff must adjust quickly, and where the front seven needs to generate disruption without relying solely on coverage to hold the play together. Just slowing the Rams down, 3 points instead of 7, a forced punt instead of a sustained drive, can swing momentum in a game like this. But the real heart of this matchup is psychological. The Lions have been the hunter for so long, chasing credibility, chasing respect, chasing their spot in the playoff picture. Now they're experiencing the weight of expectations, the pressure of being a team that others get up for, and injuries are testing whether their identity is strong enough to withstand adversity. This game becomes a mirror, reflecting back everything Detroit has built over the past 2 seasons: toughness, buy-in, culture, and the belief that no matter the obstacle, they can outwork it. You can feel the intensity building from both sides. McVay is using the Stafford storyline. The Lions are leaning into a must-win mentality, and once the ball is kicked off, everything becomes a fight for rhythm, for tempo, for poise. Detroit needs to start fast, avoid the early avalanche the Rams often create at home, and settle into the kind of gritty, physical football that travels in December. And all the while, the playoff picture sits in the background, tightening with every passing hour. A win here puts Detroit right back where they need to be, controlling their own destiny. A loss complicates everything. That's why this week has been so tense. Every snap of practice, every injury designation, every update feels magnified. But at some point, the conversation always comes back to belief. This team has been doubted before. This team has faced injuries before. This team has been counted out before. And now, in a game where the stage is bigger and the stakes are higher, they have the chance to remind the league exactly why they've become one of the toughest, most resilient teams in football. So here's where I want to leave it. With everything we've broken down, injuries, matchups, momentum, pressure, do you think the Lions can walk into Los Angeles, fight through every challenge, and walk out with the kind of win that defines seasons? And if so, what do you think will be the biggest factor that decides it? Then when you start zooming out and looking at what this game means beyond just the injury list or the matchups on paper, you realize that Detroit is entering one of those moments that end up defining how a season is remembered. It's not just the Rams. It's not just the national spotlight. It's the timing, the weight, the urgency, and the fact that every weakness, every missing player, every small detail becomes amplified the later you get into December. But that's the reality of teams that are fighting for playoff position. There's no such thing as perfect health at this stage. There's no such thing as ideal circumstances. Every contender is dealing with problems. What separates teams that fall off from teams that push through is how they respond when the cracks start showing. And right now, the way Detroit is responding tells you a lot about the culture that's been built. These players aren't making excuses about who's out or who might not be able to go on Sunday. They're preparing like they expect to win anyway. That matters more than people realize. And even with everything going on, there are still real advantages Detroit can lean on. Jared Goff knows the Rams. Ben Johnson knows how to use tempo, misdirection, and formation diversity to create stress points. Even with the tight end room decimated, even with O-line questions, this offense still has enough weapons to dictate stretches of the game if the protection holds. That becomes the central theme. Can Detroit keep Goff upright long enough to let the offense breathe? If Decker plays, it stabilizes everything. If he doesn't, the strategy shifts. More quick game, more play action to slow the rush, more creativity on early downs. And the defense, for everything it's dealing with, still has opportunities to leave its mark. The Rams' offense is dangerous, but it's not invincible. They rely on timing. They rely on rhythm. They rely on Stafford getting into a groove early. If Detroit can disrupt those first few drives, force a punt, create a negative play, stiffen in the red zone, momentum starts to tilt. And once Detroit gets rolling emotionally, that's where this team becomes its strongest. Dan Campbell thrives in games like this, where the margins are thin and the team has to push its chips to the center of the table. The Lions don't have to be flawless on Sunday. They just have to be relentless. They have to survive the stretches where the Rams surge. They have to capitalize when the opportunities come. And they have to stay connected as a unit, because teams that play for each other tend to survive weeks like this better than teams that play for themselves. When you strip everything else away, the injuries, the storylines, the stakes, what remains is simple. How badly does this team want it? With 3 games left in the season, the Lions know what the road looks like. They know they need wins. They know dropping this one makes the final 2 weeks a climb instead of a run. And they know that if they want to show the NFL they're not just a team that had one good year, but a team that's here to stay, this is the type of game they have to take. So now it comes back to you. After everything we've gone through, every angle, every update, every pressure point, how confident are you that Detroit can step into that stadium, punch back at every obstacle, and walk out with the win they absolutely need? And when you think about what's waiting for the Lions once they step onto that field in Los Angeles, it becomes obvious that this game is less about perfection and more about resilience. The Rams are going to test every weak spot Detroit has. They're going to attack the secondary, stress the linebackers with misdirection, force the corners into uncomfortable matchups, and try to wear down the defensive front with tempo. This is what Sean McVay does. He identifies the cracks and wedges them open until a team breaks. Detroit knows this. They've seen it on tape. They've lived it before. And that's why the response becomes so important. This is a game where the Lions' identity will be tested snap after snap. Can the front four generate enough pressure to make Stafford uncomfortable? Can the linebackers stay disciplined against all the eye candy? Can the secondary survive the early waves until the defense settles in? And maybe most importantly, can the offense keep pace if the game becomes a shootout? Because realistically, that's on the table. 2 high-powered offenses, 2 aggressive coaching staffs, both capable of scoring quickly. It wouldn't be surprising to see this turn into a back-and-forth heavyweight fight where the winner is the one who makes the last big play. But the Lions aren't walking into this blind. They've had games this year where the pressure was just as high. They've had weeks where injuries piled up and the odds stacked against them. And every single time, they've responded with fight, with physicality, with an attitude that refuses to fade regardless of the circumstances. That's the thing people miss when they talk about this team. The Lions don't shrink from adversity. They lean into it. They treat it like an opponent they can hit back. And that mentality is exactly what travels in December football. The coaching staff knows the stakes as well. Dan Campbell understands that this isn't a game where field goals will be enough. He's been conservative lately, yes, but this matchup doesn't give him that luxury. There will be 4th downs where the entire season feels like it's hanging in the balance. There will be drives where settling for 3 points feels like giving the Rams momentum instead of taking it. Campbell has never been afraid to put the game in his players' hands, and this Sunday is shaping up to be another one of those moments. And the players respond to that. They always have. All of this underscores why every injury update, every practice report, every limited designation carries so much significance right now. The Lions don't need everyone at full strength. They just need enough. Enough on the offensive line to keep Goff clean. Enough at tight end to keep the playbook open. Enough in the secondary to prevent explosive plays from turning into avalanches. Enough on special teams to win field position battles. Enough from the depth pieces who've been preparing for this exact kind of opportunity. Because if they get that, even just enough, then this becomes a game Detroit can absolutely win. A game where effort, toughness, and opportunistic football can outweigh the disadvantages. A game where the narrative shifts from injury problems to signature road victory. And a game where the Lions show the league that they aren't just fighting to make the playoffs, they're fighting to prove they belong